Hey y'all, it's Alana Jones from Off My Plate Food Program Consultants. Welcome to our live. Today I have a topic that I want to discuss with all of you, and so I'm just going to jump right in. I got a couple of slides to share here, so I'm going to key those up, see if I can do that. Let's see. Okay, of course it's not working the way I want it to. So we may just go without the slides. Let's see. Okay, people, you know this is how it goes, but we'll just jump in and get started. Okay, so today my topic is why do our child nutrition programs feel so overwhelming? And yeah, I just want to get this conversation started. And maybe it's just me. If I'm the only person who ever felt overwhelmed when I was operating my child nutrition programs, and maybe it's just me, and maybe we have nothing to discuss. But I feel like there are many of us out there who felt this way, either currently or at one time when they were operating their child nutrition programs. And I know when I was a director of child nutrition, the number one thing is I felt isolated. I felt like I didn't have anyone I could turn to or talk to. Even though you may know me in the child nutrition world, or you may know me in my personal life, and you may think I'm very extroverted. I'm actually quite introverted. And so when it came to like networking with other organizations or other people in CMP, I was very quiet about that. And so that always left me feeling like very isolated. And if I had a question, I didn't know where to go. I always felt like if I would reach out to like some of the administrators or the state departments, I felt like, okay, they'll know that I'm doing something wrong, you know? And so that all left me feeling overwhelmed. The other part of that is that inside my organization, I felt overwhelmed because number one, the program is complex just on its own. No matter if you're operating CACFP or NSLP or SBP, the program can just be complex. There's lots of rules, lots of regulations, lots of T's to cross, lots of I's to dot. And so you compound that with your managing staff. Okay, and so the staff have to know what you know, or more, or better, or understand it in a different way. You compound that with the need for training for yourself, training for your staff. You compound that with all the reports that are due. And then that's before we even get down to the actual cooking of food. So that's what I want to talk today about. Why does your child nutrition program feel so overwhelming? And I just want to let you know it's not just you, and honestly, it's not your fault. The program is just complex. Okay, it's just a complex program. So I always like to start with this as well. It is not a people problem. Now, granted, you may have people in your organization who are not doing their job, but that's an HR problem, right? That's a job description problem. That's a problem of people not following the rules technically, okay? But when we're talking about the overwhelm we feel in our programs, it's not actually a people problem. What I'd like to propose to you and reframe is that it's a systems problem. Because for the most part, most of the people on your team, including yourself, are hardworking, they're dedicated, they've been in the program for many years. If they're new to the program, they're willing to learn it. So you have a good group of people who want to do well in the program. The actual overwhelm and the actual issues pop up when there are not systems in place. Okay. And that's not always something that we want to admit. We don't want to admit that sometimes we just go to our jobs and throw something up against the wall and hope it sticks. You know, no one wants to admit that. No one wants to admit that sometimes you may have the knowledge but not know how to execute it. Hey, I'll raise my hand on this. For many years, I had what I would call book knowledge about certain tasks or certain tools, but I had challenges executing. One of the biggest challenges that I had was I wasn't sure how to get my people motivated to do the work. And so with that, it left us at a disadvantage because while I would, provide them with the training, how to get them to move to the next steps was always a challenge. Okay. So those are actually systems problems. And so when we're talking about systems, we need to, as leaders in child nutrition, identify that number one, everything we do has to have a system. And when we talk about systems, we immediately, that the word system becomes overwhelming Because you say to yourself, okay, Alana, you mean I got to have a system for everything? Yeah, you do. And there's certain ways that systems are put into organizations. There's certain ways that you have to execute a system. A system, let's just talk about, for example, menus. You have to have a system for menus. We know what the rules and regulations are, but how are we going to execute that? How are we going to make sure that that menu is prepared before the time of service? That the menu is prepared in a way that our team can understand it and ask questions and prepare to have the right foods on hand? How do we walk through the process of ensuring that that menu stays in compliance, not just from the time that it's written, but from the time that it's served and then recorded on a production record? That's all a system. When we are feeling overwhelmed in our programs and we are feeling like child nutrition is hard, the reason is because there's not a foundation, there's not a backup system, there's not a backbone. There's not a step-by-step process that says this is what you do at this point, at this time, with these tools. Okay. If you are operating a program that has multiple sites, when we come back to this idea of menus, is that menu showing up for each site in the same way? Can we guarantee that each site is actually executing that menu? What evidence do we have of that? See, when you put a system in place, you can answer all those questions. But if today, is April 9th and you still have questions about your April menu, that means there was a system that wasn't either developed or executed, or the system in general is broken. So that is the actual problem. When we're talking about overwhelm, it's not a people issue, okay? It is actually a systems issue. Because think about it this way. Child nutrition is a big system on its own. Each task feeds into the next task. Menus feed into production records. Production records can feed into procurement. Procurement feeds into training. Training feeds into financials. Financials feed into compliance reports. Compliance reports feed back into menus. You see the cycle here: menus, production, procurement, training, financials, compliance. All that is a system on its own. And in each one of those areas, there's systems inside of those. But if these systems are not connected with procedures and policies that always ensure that you get the correct compliant outcome, then the system is broken. Okay. And that's where the overwhelm lives. It lives in these broken systems, because I like to think of this as directors and leaders of our child nutrition programs, we're always spinning plates. Get that in your mind. You saw that magicians or jugglers do that, where they get all those plates, they put them on like some type of stick, and they just go spinning, spinning, spinning. And that's how we are in our programs. Okay, we're always spinning those plates. If one falls and breaks, okay, the system is broken. The game is over. And that's how we feel inside of child nutrition programs that are fragmented. But my question today is, what would your program look like if all these work together? Okay, if all of these systems and tasks work together, what would your program look like? But before I even get to what would your program look like, let's talk about what it looks like right now. Okay, are you experiencing symptoms of overwhelm? Where you're arriving to work and you're kind of stuck for the first few minutes because you're not exactly sure what to do. Or you get there and there's so many fires going on, you can't get to the tasks that are actually slated to be accomplished today. Those are signs of overwhelm. What if you arrive at your job and the auditor walks in? Would you be able to pass that audit? Because when we're talking about compliance, we're essentially talking about what happens when our program comes under monitoring. What would people find if they came to our program and actually lifted the hood? So my question to you is that where you want to stay? Do you want to stay in that space of overwhelm? Do you want to stay in that space of not knowing exactly what to do, when to do it, not having a staff that's trained, being unsure and uncertain of what your goals are, what your responsibilities are? Do you want to continue to live that way? And I'm going to tell you, you're going to continue to live that way. We all are going to continue to live that way if we don't begin to address the root causes of this overwhelm. which is simply that we don't have systems in place. So let's talk about this. What happens when compliance breaks? Okay. So let's take an example of, we're going to take an example of writing a menu. All right. So for the menu, we have a planning stage. So we're going to plan what we want that menu to be. We're going to look at the foods that are available to us. We're going to look at the compliance requirements. We're going to look at just what the children like to eat. That's very important. And we're going to go into this planning stage. Then we're going to go into preparation, making sure that all those foods that we plan are available to us. And here's another place we might look at the financials and make sure that these foods are affordable and make sure that they, again, meet the compliance, okay? So once we plan and once we prep, we're going to go ahead and send that out to our staff, or we're going to go into this space of now serving this food, okay? So we're going to serve this food. We're going to make sure that the children are getting the required amounts of that food. And then we're going to record that information and produce a report. But what if between serving the food and writing that food down on a production record, there's an incongruence? For instance, your menu called for chicken nuggets today, CN labeled, of course, but what was actually served were chicken tenders. Is that a problem or not? Because what the menu said was chicken nuggets, what was written on a production record was chicken tenders. Is that a problem or is it not a problem? Well, the question is the answer is actually yes, that's a problem. That's an example of a broken system, because between the plan of chicken nuggets and the actual serving of the chicken tenders, which there's no problem having that substitution, but there's a broken piece within that system that has now left your organization non-compliant. Anyone know what that piece is? Well, you can't talk back here on the live, but what that piece is that somewhere in that process, there was either lack of communication or there was a failure to write down what the change was, okay? Because that menu and that production record should match. So if your menu still says chicken nuggets, but your production record says chicken tenders, something has to change. It needs to be the menu. So it's just as simple as, striking out where you had chicken nuggets and putting the word chicken tenders. But just that little procedural change leaves your program in non-compliance, okay? Because you're not recording the accuracy of the meal. And that is an actual system. So somewhere along the line, we have to educate our staff on how to make those changes and make them in a way where that change is documented. Because a lot of times in our programs, we're doing things from memories. We might remember that we're going to change this menu, but we never communicate it by actually writing it down as a menu change, okay? And communicating that to whoever needs to know that, and communicating that to the staff. For instance, chicken nuggets, the serving size may be 5 nuggets, but chicken tenders, it may be 3. Is that conversation happening? If it's not, then you end up in a space of non-compliance. And this might be something that you're seeing in your organization all the time. And while it seems like it's just a minimum thing and it's not going to really lead to a finding that is going to lead to them shutting down your program, is this type of practice and this type of culture which gets developed in your organization, which constantly leads to the space of non-compliance. And that's where you as a leader become overwhelmed, because you're constantly looking at your staff do this, okay? And you're telling them, and you're trying to teach them how to self-correct and teach them how to communicate, but by the time you get to that problem, another problem's spiking up, okay? And what happens is this broken link here leads to broken links in other places. For instance, now your receipts don't match, your reports don't match. When you go next month to serve that chicken nugget again, you don't have any production information to tell you about how it did last month. There's so many things that happens. It's a chain reaction. And again, I want you to examine this from the place that it's not technically your fault or your staff's fault. It's the system that is either in place or not in place, or the system that's broken. Where is the check and balance on this particular process? And that's what we want to start talking about developing, so that we could get in a place where we're not so overwhelmed. So today, the next few minutes, I just want to walk through what we call here at Off My Plate Food Program Consultants. We call it the plate framework. Plate, Plate. It's a play on words, the plate framework. And this is how we begin to install operating systems into our child nutrition programs. So let's start off with P. P stands for process. Is there a process for every task that you complete in your child nutrition program? And yes, that is big, y'all. That is big. Yes, that is something like having an SOP for everything that you do. Yes, that looks like you taking the time to sit down and write down the steps 1 to 10 for a particular task. Yes, that's what we're talking about here. And that's how detailed we have to get in our programs. If we want to get to the space of no longer feeling this overwhelm about our program, then we have to start addressing the problems. Okay? And we address them one at a time, and we start by developing a process. And this is what a process looks like. The L, leadership. Okay, leadership. That's leadership from you, but that's also leadership for the person who's completing the task. When you turn a task over to a team member, then that person becomes the leader of that task. That person becomes the accountable party. So if we have a task that we're working on, we're developing a process for, we must identify who is going to be responsible for that task. Who takes the leadership on that task? And you know this from just real life experiences. If a task is not assigned to one point person or a group of point people, then it's just not going to get done. If it's like whoever feels like doing it today does it, then there's no accountability of that task getting done. Also, too, if it's assigned to one person who also has multiple other tasks, that task can get lost. So does that task need to be delegated to someone else? Well, I don't know the answer to that. We're working on figuring out a process, but that's how detailed you have to get in the process, is to identify the leader there, the person who's going to be accountable, and that's the A, accountability. Now that you know the who that's responsible, how are we going to ensure that this task is done? What is the accountability? That goes back to the checks and balances. Who's planning the paperwork? Who's reviewing it? Who's doing the self audit of it? And who's doing the double check? You got to have an accountability system. If you don't have something in place that monitors the process, then the process could break and you would never even know it. So that's when you're developing the process to address these tasks, you have to have a section there on accountability. Is how are we going to follow up on this task? Okay. Then we get to T, training. Who needs to be trained? And how do they need to be trained? I have to stress this so much with people that, okay, you're here learning by video, okay? But underneath this video, there's also going to be a transcript. With that transcript, I'm also going to attach the slides, and also within the slides, there are visuals. All that, you have to have all that when training, okay? People learn differently. If you were to have a conversation with me, I would learn. But if you would give me a piece of paper to read, I would never learn, because number one, I'm not going to stop long enough to read the thing in details, because I'm an auditory learner, okay? And it's the same thing with our staff. Sometimes they need visuals. Like they need a picture of how you want that food to look at the end of the production period. They may need a step-by-step of how to complete that recipe from top to bottom. Or they may need all the steps, okay? And in training too, we have to train for understanding, all right? So I'm going to say all this stuff to you today. If I were in a conversation with you, I would ask you, okay, so what do you understand about what I said? Because I'm training for understanding. And in that back and forth, in that communication, we can really get down to the actual execution of the task, okay? Are we now at an end product that was the original vision? If not, what happened? What happened? So training. And finally, E, evidence. What's the evidence that you have actually completed this task? So if we're just putting together a menu, the evidence would be a menu that meets all of our guidelines. So it meets nutrition guidelines. It meets the guidelines we've established for quality food. It meets the guidelines we've established for food that the kids want to eat. You know, whatever parameters you have decided to put in that process, the evidence is that every time this particular task is completed, it looks like this at the end. I have a full menu that's ready to go 2 weeks before it's ever time to serve. So I have enough time to order and prepare the food that is to come in and prepare my team, assign everybody their task. You know, that is an example of a process, y'all, developing a process through the plate framework. So when we're talking about getting out of this space of feeling overwhelmed, we want to begin to look at the tasks in our organization that are breaking all the time and apply this framework to it. Develop a process, assign leadership, make sure we have a way to stay accountable, make sure that our staff are trained and they're trained for understanding, and then that we have evidence that that task has been completed the way that we originally designed. So with that, that's just kind of overview of the play framework. And I just wanted to come over here and start this conversation with you all about why do we feel so overwhelmed? Well, we feel overwhelmed because we don't have the systems in place. And that's who we are at Off My Plate Food Program Consultants. We are your partner for strategically coming up with the systems that your organization needs so that you can get away from this place of feeling reactive in every situation and get to a space of feeling proactive. We also encourage you to work with us so that we can determine ways where your staff feel less confused and instead they feel more confident. And ultimately, we want you to move from a space where you are uncertain about the records and the compliance that you're keeping into a space of feeling confident and feeling like those records are complete. Okay. So I'm Alana Jones again. I'd love for you to private message me, or you can even book a strategy call here. And that is a free call where we can discuss where you are. And we can begin to look at your program and develop tools that help you build systems in your child nutrition program. It was great talking with you today. And I look forward to talking to you more on these lives. Have a great day.